Just doing a quick mic check and we'll get started in 2 minutes, just letting a couple of other people join. Thank you. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about replacing SharePoint 2010 workflows with Power Automate. So a quick introduction. My name is Dougie Wood. I'm one of the solution architects at Valto, and I have a strong background in kind of document solutions, predominantly SharePoint and OneDrive and things like that. But over the past couple of years, I've also been focusing quite a lot on digital transformation and sort of building kind of mobile applications. I lead the development team here at Valto. And a lot of this sort of stuff is the things that I look at on a day-to-day basis. So today's takeaways, we're going to be really taking away how do we prepare for the end of SharePoint 2010 workflows, as well as how do we prepare for the end of InfoPath and replacing those as well. There's going to be some useful resources to get yourself started and get yourself sort of familiar with what's kind of going on, and any Q&A. So there is actually a Q&A section inside of this webinar. So if you've got any questions as we go through, please feel free to just drop a question on there and we'll come to those at the end. So a rough agenda for today. We're going to talk about the announcement Microsoft has recently made and how this is going to affect you, as well as what is Power Automate. So we're talking about replacing the designer workflows with Power Automate, but what exactly is Power Automate? We're also going to talk about replacing InfoPath designer forms. So quite a lot of classic SharePoint sites and solutions which are using some of the classic versions of SharePoint Designer, for example, are also using InfoPath for designer-based forms. So looking at how we replace those with PowerApps Canvas-based forms as well. And also then what to do next, really. So, how to uncover where you're using workflows. So it can be quite difficult to find where these workflows are. So we've got some tips as well about how you can uncover where these workflows actually live, and then what to do next. So to make a bit of a plan and to go forward. And we've also got some useful resources for you that are going to help you along that path. And as I say, some Q&As at the end as well for any questions you may have. So what has been the announcement? So in July of 2020, Microsoft have announced that they'll be retiring the SharePoint 2010 workflows. Now, this doesn't really give a lot of time. This is only really given the users about 4 months notice to actually prepare for these changes. And for some people, it can be quite a lot of change in a short period of time. So the main reasons why Microsoft announced this, so it's kind of been coming for a while in terms of the Microsoft have been investing a lot of sort of time, effort, and money into the Power Platform, which as part of that is this Power Automate for replacing kind of workflows and that kind of automation piece. But the key message is that all of the SharePoint 2010 workflows are going to be completely turned off on the 1st of November 2020. So if you've not yet made any sort of movements towards this, the clock really is ticking. So how could this affect you? So as of the end of August 2020, all new Office 365 tenants have already had SharePoint 2010 workflows turned off by default. So if your Office 365 tenant has been created in the past few months, if it's been created since August, this is not going to affect you. You'll be completely fine. But for majority of people, their tenants will have previously been created years ago, potentially, and this will be affecting certain people. So starting November 1st, 2020, Microsoft will remove all the abilities to run or create and execute SharePoint 2010 workflows from the existing tenant. So any tenant that's been created before August of 2020. If your organization is using SharePoint Designer 2010 workflows, they will stop on 1st of November, and you must take immediate action to determine what the business impact is. So for some people, you might have already started replacing these with Power Automate, whereas for other people, this is going to be a real kind of impact, and you'll need to move pretty quickly. SharePoint Designer 2013 workflows will continue to run. So this announcement is only affecting the SharePoint Designer 2010 type workflows, but 2013 will continue to work. Obviously, though, take this as a hint that obviously with 2010, there's only been a 4-month kind of notice. So really, if you're kind of looking at this of replacing 2010, you should also be looking at replacing 2013 workflows, because inevitably this is going to happen again for SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow. So just be prepared on that. And in general, just get familiar with Power Automate. Obviously, the Power Platform is the future of Microsoft kind of business applications and automation. So get familiar with Power Automate, understand where it kind of fits in with the overall Power Platform. So what is Power Automate? So Power Automate is a cloud-based service within Office 365. Near all Office 365 licenses contain Power Automate as a product. So that's all the sort of typical kind of ones. Obviously, individual kind of licenses, like if you would just had a sort of mail only kind of license, it wouldn't be included. But all the kind of groupings of product licenses will contain Power Automate, and it replaces SharePoint Designer kind of workflows. So they've been sort of talking about for a while that all these kind of classic ways of working are being replaced with a modern version, and Power Automate is just the modern version of SharePoint Designer to replace those workflows. It enables users to create and automate processes. So whether that's building kind of approval systems, whether that's sort of building email notifications or reminders of how you're sort of doing that, Power Automate can replace all of those. It's streamlining and saving a lot of time of manual repetitive tasks. So if there's something, I don't know, maybe you're getting a certain kind of email and you usually file it away based on clients in a folder in SharePoint, these are all the sort of things that Power Automate can then automate for you rather than you having to do those manual repetitive tasks. So Power Automate connects with over 220 different services inside of Office 365. It's not just connecting to the products inside of Office 365, such as SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, but it's also connecting to external sort of services and products. So things like Zendesk. We use Zendesk internally as a IT support desk, and we use Power Automate for all kinds of different things, automating notifications and tracking certain things. But you can also use it to integrate with all sorts of different kind of third-party things natively. So things like Twitter. So I've seen Power Automates which go off and sort of scrape Twitter for tweets that contain certain hashtags and things like that, and you can compile that into a database. And also things like DocuSign is a very common kind of product that people use for digital e-signatures. And again, you can sort of use this as part of your overall document management inside of Office 365, where you can automate and generate and say, okay, we'll send this document off to use DocuSign to get a signature for maybe a customer or a supplier or something like that. You can also use Power Automate to make HTTP calls. So for anybody who's got a custom API and you want to integrate that into kind of your overall solution, you can do that with HTTP calls with Power Automate, which can allow you to integrate some of these external services that maybe don't have out-of-the-box kind of connectors like Zendesk, Twitter, and DocuSign. You can integrate that yourself. And Power Automate is one of the 4 products that makes up this overall Power Platform. So what is the Power Platform? So the Power Platform is made up of 4 separate products. You've got Power BI, which is all about business of analysis, creating dashboards, KPIs, things like that, and visually representing your data. You've then got PowerApps, which is all about application development. So it's a low-code platform which allows you to build mobile sort of applications for mobile phones, tablets, and making it nice and easy to capture that data. And potentially replacing things like paper-based processes and forms that you'd usually fill out, print out, and write and scan in. You can now have sort of these PowerApps which are on your phone, tablets to capture that information. Then you've got Power Automate. So Power Automate is the process automation arm of the Power Platform. So this is replacing the SharePoint Designer workflows with this kind of automation, whether it's approvals, notifications, reminders, that sort of thing. And then you've got Power Virtual Agent. So Power Virtual Agents is an intelligent virtual agent. So it's the best way to explain it is like a chat bot where you can program it to expect certain responses and then automate tasks based on that. So maybe, for example, you want to ask it a sort of question, and then it goes off and consults a list of kind of possible answers, and then returns maybe back a document or a hyperlink or something along those lines. Then underneath all of this, this is leveraging those data connectors that we were talking about earlier to connect you to not only Office 365 data, but all other kinds of data and third-party services. There's an AI builder, which allows you to plug in modules for quick, easy access to artificial intelligence, as well as most of these services also sit on top of the Common Data Service, which is like a cloud-based platform for data storage. So what role does Power Automate play in the Power Platform? So Power Automate, as you can see in this kind of cycle, if you think about a solution from the beginning, you most likely will have PowerApps, which is a way of creating an application to capture information. So replacing a paper form, maybe with a mobile app, which you can then put your information into. Power Automate will then automate any things like an approval process or notifications to people or filing documents or whatever it is. That's the automation arm of it. And then Power BI is essentially the reporting tool which can then visually represent that data with graphs and dashboards and key point indicators and so on. So that's how Power Automate sits inside of the family of products, which is the Power Platform. So next thing, we're just going to take a little look at Power Automate to sort of see how all of this comes together. So let me just come out of here. So to get to Power Automate, the first thing we're going to do is navigate to Office 365. So just by going to office.com, you can get to Office 365 homepage. And then just by searching for Power Automate, you can see underneath apps, when I click on that, that's then going to open up the Power Automate homepage for me. So within here on the left-hand side, I can see all sorts of different things on this navigation. I've got things like my approvals within here. So any type of approvals that you'll use inside of Power Automate, you can have an approvals portal to then see where you're up to with those approvals and approve and reject certain items from all sorts of different solutions all in one place. We can create brand new Power Automates, which I'm going to show you slightly later on. But also, I would advise anyone who's getting started with Power Automate to take a quick look at the templates that are available. Now, I'm quite a visual learner, so I like to kind of have a little play around and see what other people have built. And these templates area is a perfect example of where you can go to see other Power Automate workflows that other people have built. And you can find the workflows based on product. So say, for example, I was interested in Power Automate workflows related to SharePoint. If I type in SharePoint here, I can search and find all the different types of workflows that exist. So for example, like I'm starting an approval process or something like that. And then when I open that up, it will then show me exactly what that workflow process will look like. So essentially, this is the kind of the portal where we can go in and we can see these templates and we can create brand new sort of workflows from inside of here. If your workflow already exists, say for example, you've got a SharePoint Designer workflow on a document library inside of SharePoint. So if I just jump to my library here, you'll also see inside of modern SharePoint, you've got some options across the top here to create PowerApps and Power Automate directly from this library. So if I was to say I wanted to replace the SharePoint 2010 approval workflow, I can do this by clicking on the Automate, and then under Power Automate, I can click on Create Flow. And now this is going to create a flow specifically in the context of this library. Now it's going to show me all those templates, and these are the same templates that I was kind of looking at earlier on inside the Power Automate portal. But you can see these are all the kind of commonly used ones. So for example, send a custom email when a new file is added. We can request a manager approval, which I'll set up in a second. Request approval in Teams. There's all sorts of different things which out of the box, you can just grab these templates and start using them. I'm going to use this request manager approval just to show you what this looks like. So when we're grabbing this, what it's doing is it's connecting to all the possible actions that this Power Automate flow will potentially be using, and then setting up these connections here. So if any of these were red for some reason, it just means that it needs a connection. And if you click on this little 3 dots, you can usually click on resolve connection, and it'll sort that out for you. Once you click on create, this is now going to spin up that workflow from a template for me. It brings me to the first page here. So from this page, you'll be able to see the sort of key details about what this is and what this workflow is using. So we can see here the connections on the right hand side, and this is all the data types that it could possibly be connecting to. And I'll explain these a little bit more afterwards. You can then see owners. So the owners are the people who would be able to actually edit this particular flow. And now if I go into my flows area here, you'll see my flows, and you'll see the recent flows that I've been working with. And I can rename them by clicking on the pencil here, and then I can type in, for example, approval workflow, and I click on save, and that's then going to save my approval workflow. If I go back into my flows now, you can see it appears here under my flows. Now, there's also other areas, for example, like team flows, where you can share flows. So that's where multiple people have access to edit a particular flow. So if I just go back into to edit this particular flow, you see under owners, at the moment, only I am an owner. Whereas if I share this with somebody else, so say, for example, I share this with Kyle, click on OK, I go back, just need to refresh this. Now, Kyle is an owner also as well, so he would also be able to update and edit this particular Power Automate workflow. So if I go back into my flows now, you'll see it's removed itself from my flows, and it's now placed it inside of team flows. So this means now it's a team flow, multiple people will be able to access and edit this particular workflow. So now if I go into here, I can edit the actual workflow by clicking on the edit button across the top. And this is where I can then see how my workflow is made up. So it's a lot more visual than a SharePoint Designer workflow is. So I can say in a kind of nice sort of block format how all of this comes together. Now, workflows are essentially created the 2 or 3 main kind of components of a Power Automate workflow. The first is a trigger. So every workflow, every Power Automate workflow must have a trigger. It must have something that is going to trigger it. So say, for example, in this case, it's for a select device, which means if I select it, click on Power Automate a particular document. However, you can have all sorts of different types of triggers. And this could be added, the document's deleted, and that's just SharePoint. It could be used as a trigger from an Outlook email or an email that comes into a shared mailbox. It could be for a third party kind of connector, whether it's someone's tweeted you or something like that. There's all sorts of different ways you can. Once the workflow is then triggered, you then have a combination of actions and conditions which meet workflow. The workflows always start by running from the top all the way down. So you have a condition is essentially saying if something meets a certain logic, then if yes, this is the true branch, and if no, this is the false branch. So this is basically saying if the sort of status contains 404, then it does not equal 404, then it will continue on, or if it does, it will automatically terminate itself. Then we've got a bunch of different actions in here, which is going to get my manager's profile, and it's going to start an approval process, which is going to send an email automatically to my manager, and he's going to receive that and be able to approve my workflow from my document from here. So this is just an example of sort of the actions that you can add. But also, if you click on, say, add action here, you can see all the different things that potentially my Power Automate can connect to. So these are all kind of third-party kind of connectors, as well as the Office 365 connectors that I can connect to. So there's all sorts of different things in here. And as I say, if you can't find something that you want to connect to, you can also use like HTTP calls to connect to sort of third-party kind of APIs and things like that as well. So once you're happy with your workflow and you've created this, just by clicking on save, and if I go now back out This has now saved my workflow, and my approval workflow is ready to be used. So if I jump back into my library area here, if I then go to find a file and select that file and click on Automate, I can then choose the approval workflow, which is the workflow that I created before. Now, if it's the first time you're using sort of PowerAutomate, it might ask you to accept these particular connections as well. So this is almost like saying it's wanting to sort of use these on behalf of me. So I just need to accept that particular connection. I'm going to say, yep, put a little message in here, and then click Run Flow, and that's now going to run my PowerAutomate workflow. I know that it's run, so if I go back into here and refresh, I know that my flow has run because I can see here that this flow has now started running. And the really cool thing about this is it's much better from a troubleshooting perspective, because if I jump into this item, I can then see exactly where my workflow has got up to and see whereabouts it sits inside of here. So I can see at the moment it's sent the approval and it's now waiting on my manager to approve this particular item. If it had sort of died at any particular point, so at this point, if it had failed for some reason, it would have an error. I'd be able to click on this box and it would give me the full details of what. So that is PowerAutomate, and that's how that kind of comes together inside of a SharePoint document library. So what about the InfoPath side of things? So a lot of people that are using legacy classic SharePoint, they're also using InfoPath for creating custom forms that sit on top of it for customization. So InfoPath it provides that ability to create a custom user interface for your SharePoint lists, for example, where you can then categorize certain fields. You can have drop downs that reveal other drop downs and things like that. However, just as a heads up, InfoPath Designer itself is actually being sort of deprecated, and the InfoPath Designer is only going to be supported until 2023. So realistically, in the next couple of years, this is going to be removed and it's going to stop working altogether. So now is a good prime time to be thinking about actually replacing any InfoPath forms that you have. Now, when it comes to replacing those InfoPath forms, the solution for that is to replace them with a PowerApps form. So if you've already got InfoPath on a SharePoint list, for example, for new items, then you can replace that with PowerApps. So say, for example, if I just jump back into my examples over here, I've got an example contacts list here. So this is just a list inside of SharePoint. And as you see, if I was to edit or create a new item, the form here, this is what it looks like out of the box. It's very basic. It's very sort of boring. It's not styled in any way, and there's no customization. So it's just literally as it comes natively out of the box. Now we can actually customize this by clicking on the edit form and then clicking on customize with PowerApps. Now, what this will do is it'll open up the PowerApps Designer, so we can go inside of here and we can customize our form. Now, this interface looks, when it loads, it looks very similar to InfoPath. It's got a lot of the same kind of features. So if you're used to customizing forms with InfoPath, then PowerApps will be quite sort of easy for you to pick up. So this is essentially what the interface will kind of look like in edit mode, and we can make alterations and update our PowerApps through this kind of view. So just in conscious of time, I've done a bit of a Blue Peter, and here's one I've created earlier. So the same contacts list I have customized with PowerApps. So now when I edit my form, you'll then see this is a bit different. Okay, it's still very basic. It's only a very quick proof of concept. But you can see I've now added a bit of branding. I've added a slightly different layout. And I've also added things like buttons across the bottom. Now, these could navigate me to, say, sending an email. So it could be a PowerAutomate workflow that I click. And then based on an email address, which is in here, it could automatically send an email. It could automatically create me a document. So PowerAutomate could go off and create a document inside of SharePoint. Or I can open a document location. So you can even launch hyperlinks directly from inside of your forms as well. So this is a great way of creating a sort of digital transformation solution using SharePoint as a data source, and then using PowerAutomate for sort of automating kind of processes and workflows, and then using PowerApps to provide that nice kind of customized interface inside of your form. So let me just go back here. So with all of that in mind, how do you know sort of where SharePoint 2010 workflows are actually being used? So it can be pretty difficult using just SharePoint Designer to navigate through and find where all of these workflows are. So what Microsoft have recently released is a new tool called the SharePoint Modernization Scanner, which, by the way, there's a link in the useful links of these slides at the end of this document. So if you would like to be able to access that tool, just feel free to contact me and I can send you these slides for those useful links. And essentially what that tool will allow you to do is it's preparing you to sort of transition your classic solutions into modern SharePoint. So any classic things that like SharePoint Designer workflows, like InfoPath and things like that, is preparing you for that. So the tool, so the use of the tool is for the following things. So optimizing the usage of modern lists and libraries. So essentially making sure that you're sort of using the sort of modern user interfaces and connecting these to sites in Microsoft 365 groups. So maybe you've got classic SharePoint Teams sites that can then be upgraded to Microsoft 365 group. There are ways of modernizing the wiki and web part pages by creating modern site pages and rebuilding classic publishing portals as modern publishing portals. And the key thing here is understanding where the classic workflows are. So by running this tool, it will easily identify for you where these classic SharePoint 2010 workflows are running, so you know exactly where they are. And you guys easily be able to work out from there who the kind of maybe the SharePoint site owner is that you can contact and say, are these still being used? Can they be replaced with Power Automate? And starting that process. As well as that, you can also use the tool for understanding where InfoPath is being used for the exact same kind of process. And then understanding the usage of sort of like classic blog pages and classic sort of SharePoint sites. So with all that in mind, what should you be doing? What are the next steps? So the first thing is ensure you notify your users. So make sure people who are creating the workflows are aware. Site owners should be aware that maybe there's certain functionality which is no longer going to be working for them. Updating the senior leadership team so they can get the message out to everybody, and updating the IT support desk that potentially when it comes to the sort of the 1st of November, that they could be getting a load of requests to say, for some reason, my workflows have stopped working in SharePoint and things like that. And they should be aware that actually this is potentially that issue. You want to look at updating any of your training materials. So if you've got any guides, videos, anything like that, you want to make sure all of those are being updated, and you're generally pushing the message about adoption of being Power Automate rather than SharePoint Designer workflows. You want to use the SharePoint Modernization Scanner to identify any SharePoint 2010 workflows and InfoPath forms and start making plans around that. You want to review the Power Automate resources as a solution to legacy workflows. So as part of the useful resource links on the next slide, I've put in some really useful content in there just to help you with your planning of that process. Also, you can raise a Microsoft support ticket to be considered for an extension. So in extreme cases where it's a bit of a short time frame for you to turn around and it's going to really impact and have business kind of critical impacts, then you can raise a Microsoft support ticket. There's no real kind of guided route for this, but we've been working with clients recently by raising Microsoft support tickets on their behalf, and they are under sort of consideration for having extensions put in place. And then finally, engaging with Valto for assistance. So we can provide ad hoc support for bridging those knowledge gaps and getting people upskilled with Power Automate instead of using SharePoint Designer. We can provide all levels of training courses for people who have never touched Power Automate before, or people who have used SharePoint Designer and they're trying to transition their skills into Power Automate. As well as we do offer a full sort of end-to-end package of redeveloping SharePoint 2010 workflows, where we would talk to you about what the requirements are, and it's a good opportunity as well to update any workflows which potentially are a bit old and a bit sort of clunky. You can redevelop those SharePoint 2010 workflows, and we can talk to you about what works for them, what doesn't work so well for them, and then we can provide you a fixed price project for actually replacing those workflows with Power Automate. We've got some useful links. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got the SharePoint Modernization Scanner. So this will help identify all those problem areas and start helping you make a plan for what needs to be updated. We've got guidance for migrating classic workflows to Power Automate flows in SharePoint. And these are some really good content that come from Microsoft to help you with that. We've got review the Power Automate resources as a solution to legacy workflows. And again, more content which is going to help you with your overall kind of sort of roadmap to upgrading, and then any further details from Microsoft on this particular case. So there is a page which is giving all the latest information and updates frequently about this particular change and what's going on. So staying in the loop from that perspective. As I say, if you do want a copy of these slides, please feel free to get in touch, and obviously the useful links will be included as part of that. So I'm just going to have a look now. We've got a little bit of time left for any Q&As, so I'm just going to check the Q&A section, see what questions we've got. Okay, so we've got a question here. Can Power Automate be triggered automatically on a daily basis? So yes, it can be. So you can have triggers which run, say, for example, every day or based on hours, and that then can go off and automate certain processes as and when you kind of need them to run. It's worth noting as well, actually, as a side note on that, is that the Power Automate flows can only run for up to 30 days. So what I mean is once it's triggered, it can only exist for 30 days. And then it'll sort of fail out. So there's a little bit of a difference to that as well in terms of the way SharePoint Designer workflows used to work, where technically they could just sit there almost forever. You have to plan the way you're going to create your Power Automate workflows to make sure that that they're not going to fail out after sort of 30 days. Another question here, can you trigger Power Automate workflow from a button in PowerApps form? So yeah, just like the sort of form I was kind of showing you earlier, you can have those buttons inside of your PowerApps. When you click on them, they will then act as a trigger. So the actual trigger is physically clicking the button, and then that starts that Power Automate workflow in the background. So that's all time we've got. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. You can contact us via sort of hello@valto.co.uk. My name is Dougie Woods, and you can contact me via LinkedIn as well. You can please feel free to contact us there. And if you've got any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you for your time.